the strategic goals for SAME is to increase government industry collaboration and engagement. So I've, with forethought, have arranged the programs so that we got the maximum connection between industry and government. So this program today is a great example of that. So we've got first a great government representative, Tim Nauman from USACE Europe District. And Tim's going to talk to us about cybersecurity design specifically for USACE projects in Germany. So Tim, his background is he's a senior electrical engineer with the Corps, and he provides technical expertise for design and construction of electrical systems, communications infrastructure, and control systems cybersecurity. Tim's in his second of a three-year tour, maybe longer, but right now it's 3 years with Europe District. Previously, Tim was the control systems cybersecurity subject matter expert for the Air Force, the Air Force Civil Engineer Center located at Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida. And Tim has served as an electrical engineer with DoD for 15 years now, and in private industry before that for about 10 years. And a fun fact that Tim shares with us is that he somehow asserts that Johns Hopkins University actually does have an engineering school. So maybe Tim can explain to us the story behind that comment. And then for our industry rep, we are lucky to have Susan Howard, and Susan's going to talk to us about facility-related control systems cybersecurity from the industry standpoint. Susan serves as director of the Federal ICS Cybersecurity for Jacobs Federal and Environmental Solutions Group, which is headquartered in Arlington, Virginia. And Susan leads a team in control systems cybersecurity design, consulting, and assessment services for many federal clients, including Corps of Engineers, Naval Facilities Command, and the Air Force Civil Engineer Center. Susan's been with Jacobs for 4 years and previously was Control Systems Cybersecurity Manager at Intel Corporation and at Portland General Electric for critical infrastructure protection at the North American Electric Reliability Corporation. And this is a not-for-profit international regulatory authority that seeks to reduce risks for the power grid. Susan has a bachelor's in quantitative analysis from Penn State and a master's in cybersecurity and telecom engineering from University of Colorado's College of Engineering and Applied Sciences. And I will also add that even though I said her organization is headquartered in Arlington, Susan's actually on the West Coast. So she got up super early to come talk to all of us today, and looks bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and that's quite a credit to her. And her fun fact is that she was active duty Air Force for 10 years as a crypto analyst and as a telecom specialist at Elmendorf Air Force Base in Anchorage, Alaska. So we've got some really great presenters going to give us great information this morning. So I want to get right to that because they've got a lot to share. I'll just add real quickly, as Cherie says, please feel free to add your comments into the chat box, but we'll wait till they get through all their information before we ask your questions, but we'll hopefully get to all of them. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tim.
Thank you very much. I want to say hello to everyone and thank you very much for joining in for today's presentation. And thank you for the privilege to speak before you all. I'll turn my camera off so it's we reduce some of the bandwidth here. So my talk today has to do with the cybersecurity design for projects that the Corps of Engineers works on in Europe. The Corps of Engineers is a design and construction agent for MILCON projects in our theater, this part of the European theater. And cybersecurity is turned into a very, very large and growing topic and brings with it issues that I'll hope to explain some today and how the Corps is working its way through it. Next slide, please. Did the slide update by chance?
Yeah, it did.
Okay, well, I brought a copy with me, so we're good. My screen didn't update. So we're on slide 2. We need to describe two background pieces for everyone to understand what, to be able to be participating in the conversation. I hear it many times. People say, well, what do you mean by cybersecurity? And this, if you ask somebody what is cybersecurity, is the generic flavor of cybersecurity. It's about protecting computers and networks and the things that connect them all from these issues: damage, misuse, essentially someone taking advantage of the system for their own use against its intended function. And it can be done a lot of different ways. So how do you secure yourself from these types of issues? And it's done in the choice of the hardware and software that you build into a system. It's how you put it together, how you separate them from one another, how you let them speak to each other, and who do you give permission to talk or to configure or to work on them. And that is it in its most general form. You are adjusting the pieces and parts you choose for a network, and you're adjusting the way that they speak and talk to one another, and then confirming who has access to it, who's authorized to use it, and how do you know that the person who's using it is who in fact they say they are. All these things are useful for any information system, and it's important to know that they consider an information system to be anything that transmits data. Now, control systems are unique because they do that, but they also make things function. So these information system families that you see here have different needs and perspectives, but everything we're looking at falls into these types of families. Information enterprise is what you and I are using right now to talk to each other. Operational technology, that's the control system that's in your car or running the energy system for a building or a building automation system. Weapons systems have their own. How do you provide cooling for a radar facility or for the backup power system for an Intel facility? Those are all part of those things. And then finally, utility infrastructure. That is the grid. That's photovoltaic arrays. That is energy recovery, load shedding, things like that. So that is what we mean in the general sense of what cybersecurity is, what the industry typically thinks it to be. Next slide. The second piece of this is we're on slide 3, is something that's unique to Germany. The Corps of Engineers has different contract mechanisms based on an agreement with the German federal government, the ABG, they call it. So it breaks it into 2 types: a direct project, where the Corps of Engineers has direct contract authority and can use a government contract with an AE to provide a service. They're typically things that only the US can uniquely do, such as build a command center or a SCIF facility or something that's typically connected to a military function. The other type of contract that's out there is indirect, where the Corps of Engineers is obligated to go to a state construction office and arrange a contract to provide a service. And that state construction office provides the service through their own contract with an architect, engineer, and a general contractor. So the Corps of Engineers is the source of the contract. They make a request for tender, which is an ABG3. The Bauamt, which actually is the one that is responsible for the actual contract with the builder and designer, agrees to it and sends back an ABG4, which is an acceptance. And at that point, they are the ones, the Bauamt is the one that creates this contract. And they're unique because in the direct contracts, we can use US guide specs all that we wish. We can use a US formatted contract if we wish. But when it comes to indirect contracts, we are now directed to use European standard as much as possible, unless the US standard is more strict or involves safety and security. And there we have to be descriptive. We can't simply say, go to UFC and do what it says. We have to pull out the sections that are appropriate and explain them in language to the BAWAP so they can execute the contract. So that's an important point to note. It's going to come up later. Next slide. So we're on slide 4. What does DoD mean by cybersecurity? Well, the Department of Defense says that we will use what's called risk management framework, which lets organizations apply whatever management they wish to reduce the risk from a cybersecurity threat. And it's based on the National Institutes of Science and Technology, a special publication. So it's essentially cybersecurity is reducing risk. It's risk management. And we go one step further. How do they do that? Well, for buildings and facilities, there's a UFC with the 40106, which is called Cybersecurity of Facility-Related Control Systems. But what it actually does is enforce the requirements of risk management framework for these facilities. And it applies to those systems you see listed there. It tells the contractor not how to design them, but what security features we are going to ask to be able to provide a certain level of risk mitigation for those systems. So it's important to know that the UFC 410 does not design a system that's like for HVAC or things like a water treatment system. It actually says if you happen to have those systems on that list, we need these features included, and we need documentation that we can give to the customer at the end so that they can pursue their risk management framework duties. We do that through a guide spec, which is essentially a list of the requirements for what documentation and features should be included from a security point of view. And that's an important piece because that is essentially the template most folks use for how to build this into a project. We have another directive from the DoD, particularly for the Corps, which is in an engineering construction bulletin. And there it says that we have to have a mandatory requirement to coordinate all of this cybersecurity work with our mandatory Center of Expertise for Cybersecurity in Huntsville. So it's important to know that when we say DoD cybersecurity, that these guide specs and the UFC are all part of what we work on and we have to apply because they're required for all MILCON and SRM projects. And they apply to both direct and indirect contracts as well. So that we don't make a distinction there. However we build it or buy it, these things have to be built in. Next slide. So when we say compliance with the UFC, what do we mean? Well, there are some features that have to be in from that's what the UFC asks for. Essentially, what it says is that the customer has to talk to us and let us know about what loss impact that they feel is appropriate for those systems. And it means that the customer has to be able to participate and understand what they're asking for. The second piece is that when we get to, the UFC also is directed towards low and moderate loss impact levels. It's entirely possible for a customer to feel that what they have is a high loss impact system, something that if the control system failed, they would have a problem in supporting their mission. Well, there are unique standards for that say these are losses as they relate to the security of the United States, not necessarily to your local mission. So a lot of times people over impact themselves, but the UFC applies to low and moderate systems. If it ever reaches a high level of impact, that means the UFC really doesn't apply. It even goes on to say that we have to have the customer involved in the discussions for how to execute a high loss impact system. It is a big deal when it goes to a high level. And it assumes that the customer can support what they're asking for. And that is a real challenge because we're talking about engineering. So the next piece is a UFGS. That actually translates what we were discussing in the UFC into actual actions. What does the contractor have to do? What must they deliver in the way of documentation? And what features did they include in the system that they're asking for? And if you look closely at the slide where I talked about what is cybersecurity, all of those features that we spoke about tend to be things that are IT based. An information technology person would be the one to understand them. You don't find an engineering discipline that actually does this. So when you're translating the UFC, which is asking for IT-based security, into a guide spec, which is a list of requirements for a construction project, it becomes complicated. And then what makes this interesting for us both, that if you want to comply with the federal standard, both of these documents have to be somehow put together in a list of functional requirements for indirect projects in Germany. Direct projects, you can take them literally as they are, tailor them for the system you're working on, and use them in the contract. But for the indirect projects where we work with the BAWA, we have to translate that into words, actions, features, specifications that would tell a contractor literally, you must provide such and such to deliver us the security that we want. Next slide, please. So how do folks do that? Well, there are key roles. There's a system owner. Somebody ultimately is the person who receives this, and they are the ones responsible for the system after it's turned over. The service branch, Army, Navy, Air Force, they have a group of folks that are supposed to guide the customer in understanding what they're looking for. And the organization, the actual person at the base or the garrison who's going to receive this building with these systems in there, they have to be involved because they're supposed to determine the loss of impact of the system, and they have to determine whatever requirements for anything specific that they want. So there are key roles for the UFC that have to be in place for us to use it. Next slide. So those are the roles, but what do these roles actually do? Well, there we see under the responsibilities. The system owner has to provide those features that helps the designer understand what security level of impact they have to design to. And they also tell them if they're going to be, if this new system that they're building gets connected to a host system on the base utility monitoring system, or the fire alarm reporting system. They're the ones that are supposed to be able to provide the details. Notice I said supposed to. That's not necessarily how it works. The service point of contact. So if the system owner says, I don't know, then we go back to the Army, Navy, or Air Force and ask them, well, your owner, the person on your end can't do this. What happens now? And the service branch actually can step in place for the system owner and tell them what's going on. So there's a backup to let you know that. And like I said, the organization are those two groups, either the service branch or the garrison. That's where this building is being built with these systems in it. So we now know what the customer is supposed to do, what the service branch is supposed to do, but now we get to the point, well, okay, now who's going to design this? Next slide, please. There we say these are the designer's responsibility. So the document has this feature in it called a control correlation identifier. It's a unique definition that the DoD uses to say, well, if you are going to build a feature in like, I need to have a password greater than 10 characters long, what number should I assign that requirement so that anybody who looks at the report can find it? And they call that, this identifier, this tag is a CCI. And it actually lists all of these particular features that are going to be included in the design. It's a difficult thing to use, but it was the mechanism that people figured out how we could turn a risk register into a list. And that's what the designer has to prepare from the information that we give him. The designer develops a design package that includes all these requirements in there and all the features that the control system should have to be able to satisfy the UFC. The connection here is that the engineer is supposed to know that if this control system, say it's a building automation system, that it has features in it that would allow you to provide a password at a workstation. It can't simply just be a generic box of some sort. There's supposed to be a connection that the designer understands that when they build a control system, they're building it to provide capability to be secure. And that's what's there. And that's what they're asking the designer to do. The designer has to document the criteria and has to explain to the general contractor how to test the system to be sure that what they've asked for has actually been built. And that documentation of the testing, of the design itself and the security features is the deliverable of the UFC that goes to the customer at acceptance. So already you can see this is a fairly complicated thing, but it all seems to hinge on the basic information of what kind of a system do I have? How secure do you want it? So let's go to the next slide. So where do you get all this stuff? It's the PMs, the customer PM, the Corps of Engineers PM is involved in this. And the customer PM is supposed to be able to find all of this information about what they intend to do with the systems that are being built for them. You can see that's a fairly decent list, but they tend to be things that are risk management framework oriented. And those are almost always held by an IT organization within the customer's organization itself. You don't find these people in the engineering office or in the DPW. Someone has to go track them down. And they say that the customer's PM has that responsibility. The UFC actually assumes that, as a matter of fact, that the customer will support the activity that we're asking, that we need from them to execute the UFC. The Corps of Engineers PM, on this hand, his job is to take the information or ask the information of the customer in the form of a request for information. It's a document that actually shows, I asked this question, this is the official answer I have, and then they include that in the project record so that at each design phase, we're not reinventing the wheel. So this basic information from the customer's PM becomes a fundamental building block for how to execute the project itself. The Corps of Engineers PM also coordinates with the Mandatory Center of Expertise, and they make sure that all of these features are rolled into the each design review as we go along. Next slide, please. So when it comes down to, well, what does this actually mean? How do we clarify all of these nuances that are there? That's essentially what the job is of the Control System Security, Cybersecurity Mandatory Center of Expertise is. They are there to provide help to budget the work that needs to be done, participate in the planning charrette so that the requirements are well listed, be part of design submittals so they can help guide the conversation. And they make sure that the AE has the right information so that they can support the activity. And they're looking for these submittals that are specified in the UF guide spec. That's what they're asking for. So the Corps has a mechanism to support this, and it's fairly thorough, but it's a very, very difficult topic to coordinate, and it takes time. Next slide. This is an example matrix of what we suggest needs to be filled out for each project. And you can see they're the names of the systems we're talking about. And those are the ones that are most interesting to us, or that of interest to us, because you find them in almost every project. And we look for who is the system owner, this authorizing official, which is the person ultimately within the customer's organization who approves the risk that it delivers, and details about the impact level and if it's connected to a host network. The existing authority to operate is a question you ask the customer, because if an existing authorization is out there, then most of these other features or these questions about impact levels, security controls, all the system owners, that's all defined already in an existing authority to operate package. And that's why we ask if it exists, but many times it doesn't. So because this is such a difficult thing to execute on the DoD's behalf. So essentially what we're looking at, that the Corps has a way to support this. It's a challenge nonetheless, because we're executing an information technology topic by a group of engineers who don't have a core discipline that supports this. So it's constantly reinventing the wheel. We're trying to come back to a place where we can explain clearly what is it that we want to build when we're building a control system, and those features that we would consider to be security that gives them a certain level of protection. So in summary, we'll go to the next slide. All of these requirements we're talking about are based on the contract type. You can use the guide spec directly if it's a direct project, or you have to describe it in words, in paragraphs, in sections if it's an indirect one. So the indirect projects, those narratives, they have to be a complete description. It's not like saying, well, go to chapter 2.1 of the UFC and do what it says there. You essentially have to digest that chapter in verse and explain what you're looking to do. And it has to be clear enough so that the contractor, the German contractor, can know what's needed to be done. And there they have a very different bid structure. So the guide spec format for the UFGS cannot simply be just cut and pasted. It has to be actually translated into something that's functional. So if it's a direct project, you're good to go. It's faster and easier. It brings its own problems, but from an execution perspective, it's a whole lot simpler. And we also find too that we know that the system owners and the organizations typically don't have people enough people to support the roles that the USC asks for, or they don't have understanding of what RMF is asking them to do. They haven't been trained in it. I've even had people where I've asked, how did you get this job? And he said, well, I didn't take off that day and it was assigned to me. So that's a heck of a basis for taking a role for something as serious as this, but that's what happens. And finally, the actual German government itself, they are working very hard to understand this. It doesn't exist, the cybersecurity requirement doesn't exist in a form our version of it doesn't exist in a form that they are used to seeing. So they do have cybersecurity in Germany, but it's based on a different construct, which is it's an International Electrotechnical Commission standard, an IEC standard. And they treat things very differently here. And the people who are supposed to do them aren't the same people we think we assign them in our projects. So, but they all have the same issue, is that these things are IT based. All these security features are IT based, and building trades really don't know how to do that. And so it requires them to pay for a technical consultant. And the cultural difference exists that we think of things in the US way and the Europeans think of their own. Here is the example. In the US, there's a design in place. We look at the design of the system itself and say, oh, these are the security features we have to have. In Europe, the final design comes at the end. The concept of the design is in the beginning, but we're asking for security features to be delivered up front. And that doesn't mesh with the order in which they deliver their design. And that causes a great deal of frustration and concern and difficulty to be sure that the US requirements are built in. So in summary, we're working to improve that situation by the narrative, but we work within the construct of the contracts that the Corps has and with the support of the Mandatory Center in Huntsville. So that's my presentation, and we'll take questions after Susan is done with hers. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Tim. You are a great instructor on new topics, very thorough and clear. So now we'll pass the mic virtually over to Susan.
Hi, thanks, Tim. And if you can add any European region flavor to any of these slides, please interject, Tim. I know that you have your own special flavor of control system cybersecurity there. Thanks. I'm going to turn my camera off as well to conserve our bandwidth. And next slide, please. And so here's what I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to talk kind of fast, but the session is being recorded and you can use these slides as reference. And any topics that Tim covered, I'm going to just skim over them because you don't want to hear the same thing twice, I'm sure. And I'm speaking from the A&E perspective. So these are the things that we do every day and the challenges that we encounter across all agencies. And we've probably done about a couple hundred design projects so far. And so next slide, please. So UFC 410.6 is why we're here today. This changed the entire world for A&E firms and general contractors. Next slide, please. Number one challenge, of course, anytime there's a new UFC, which was issued in 2016, is funding. The DD 1391 should include cybersecurity funding in line block 9, and the design costs for cybersecurity are something that the A&E firms and general contractors for construction really need to consider. This was quite a shock back in 2016, but I think that we've leveled out quite a bit. Next slide, please. So these are all the details that the DD 1391 needs to include for control system cybersecurity, and you'll see this FRCS acronym a lot. Stands for facility related control systems, and that's just so that we know that we're not talking about IT cybersecurity, but control system cybersecurity. Next slide, please. So this is a DD 1391 for those of you that haven't been lucky enough to see these. We do a lot of DD 1391 validations and program analysis, and the cybersecurity cost should be included in Block 9 of the DD 1391, and there's a narrative that goes in Block 10. If you don't have that at the start of your MILCON project, you've already got a problem that you need to address. Next slide, please. So one problem that one challenge that we have is the common misconception that in the DD 1391 costs, design labor is included for cybersecurity, and that's actually not true. So we have this, as you all probably know, the 6% design fee limitation for A&E services. So cybersecurity for design services, that needs to be included in that 6% constraint. So for design services, depending on the complexity of the project, you're going to need at least between 100 and 300 labor hours for a cybersecurity person to go in and do the things that need to be done that Tim so eloquently articulated. And these things cannot be done typically by your mechanicals or electricals, although we found a happy medium at Jacobs, and we have now trained cyber certified our mechanicals, electricals, industrial engineers, and such forth to do this work for us. But it still requires a different cost item on your design, and that's really important to know early in the project. Next slide, please. So again, about cost, I talk about this a lot because it's really the #1 challenge we see every single day. The project's not funded via 1391, or the design moves forward without proper funding, and then we have challenges in the middle of the project. So the DD 1391 does not include the design labor cost in it. The 1391 includes contractor installation costs and contractor commissioning for cybersecurity, and if required, the post-construction award services. So this is a big deal for general contractors. We get these questions all the time from general contractors. They see this 250511 and they have no idea how to support that requirement. So there are very few people in the market right now. So this is a big challenge. Next slide, please. So on the DD 1391s, Corps of Engineer has one way to estimate, AFCEC has another way, and NAVFAC has another way. And so right now, these costs are not very well aligned with the market costs, but this is where we started, and I understand that we are getting closer and closer to being aligned with the market. Right now, the Corps of Engineer uses $250,000 for each control system. So, for instance, if I have a UMCS, which is your HVAC system, a fire system, and an electrical substation, for instance, that's $250,000 per control system. So at the end of the day, I need to have $750,000 in my project budget for cybersecurity control systems. And this is a lot of money, and we hear this every single day. But those are budgetary numbers only. The general contractor has to go and get a bid, of course, before he does the work, to make sure he gets market cost. Next slide, please. So AFCEC has a cybersecurity cost guidance memo dated 2019, and I haven't seen a newer version. But so they use $250,000 for all control systems if square footage is 50,000 square feet or less. If it's over 50,000 square feet, they include it as 2.5% of the programmed amount. So this is a bit different than the way Corps of Engineer does it. Next slide, please. Then we have our friends at NAVFAC that have their own way of estimating this cost, and that can be found in this CRB guideline document. The last version we have is dated March 2020, and it's really small print, but you can read it later. They also use a percentage methodology. Next slide, please. And it's typically $100,000 for small projects, and then it goes up as a percentage after that. So there's 3 different cost methodologies across the 3 different agencies for DD 1391 budgetary estimates. Next slide, please. This is a sample DD 1391 from a Corps of Engineer project. You'll see they have 3 different control systems listed and 3 different costs, $250,000 each. Next slide, please. This is a sample from a NAVFAC project. You'll see that it's calculated as a percentage of the total construction cost or total facility cost, which ends up to be $230,000. Next slide, please. And then again, AFCEC, who lists it as one lump sum, $250,000 for the whole project, for this particular project. So each 1391 is going to be a little bit different based on the agency that you're serving. Next slide, please. The second challenge is getting a seat at the table. Like Tim was noting, it's fairly new sector, this cybersecurity, especially in construction, control system cybersecurity. You know, general contractors aren't used to dealing with cybersecurity at all as a part of facility design. So it's very new. You have to ensure the proper government stakeholders are at the design charrettes. But most of the time, you know, cybersecurity isn't involved in the design charrette. That's getting better. But the people that you want there for sure are, if it's Air Force Civil Engineering, if it's Navy, PWD, and for Army, you want DPW. And then the comm folks, G6, N6, or comm squadron. Next slide, please. The other challenge seems really trivial, but it really stumps a lot of A&E and general contractor folks. And that's the fact that in the original 250511 and other documents, there's a what they call the risk management framework website. It's a .mil website. If you don't have a CAC, you're not going to get to that website. So there is a public-facing website, but it has limited information. So we found some alternative solutions here. There is the this CERTIP ESTCP website listed there. It has most of the things that a CAC-enabled website has, so that A&Es can find the right templates and other resources. Whole Building Design Guide has a brand new section on cybersecurity. I say brand new, but it's probably about 6 months old. That was written by Michael Chipley. It's great resource. And then there's these things called Identitrust tokens that some of you may know. It's a certificate on a chip, on a USB really. And so we are able to get into this .mil website that way without a CAC. We get this question a lot. People get stumped. And so this is something that hopefully is being rectified in the upcoming revision. Next slide, please. Okay, the other question we get a lot is, how do I know if my control system needs to be secured? So we put a list of questions here that we go through with our discipline leads, with our system owners, DPW folks, to vet whether the control system that they have needs to be secured. And most of the time the answer is yes. Next slide, please. And if those questions don't provide us with a good enough answer, we go to this thing called the FRCS Master Inventory Control List, which again can be found on that CAC-enabled website for those that are active duty or military civil, or it can be found here at this public website. There's about 250 different control systems, or a few more, and you'll find them all listed in here with suggested CIA impact levels. So not only can we find the control system on here, we can, and they go all the way, range from airfield lighting systems, building control lighting systems, And HVAC, we have a lot of variation here. Transportation, traffic signaling, all kinds of control systems listed in here. And if we don't get the CIA impact level that we need from our government counterparts, we use the levels that are listed here as assumptions so that we can push the design forward and don't delay any construction or design waiting for those impact levels. Next slide, please. So the challenge with RFIs is that many installations, especially the smaller installations, they don't have dedicated staff that can answer these RFIs. So the solution we have to that is we, after you've done a few, you can figure out the answers to most of these questions yourself. Like if it's NAVFAC, if it's a NAVFAC installation, the authorizing official is Rear Admiral Korka. If it's AFCEC, it's going to be AFA4C. And if it's Army, it's going to be the functional AO in the region. Is that true, Tim, for the European region as well?
It is true, but there's very little contact with the AO. And so that is part of the organization's role, and it really has nothing to do with what we do in the design of a system. Okay, and so, yeah, so the AO we put on the basis of design or design analysis so that we provide the information to our client, but the contractor, of course, is not going to see that information. System owners are pretty standard across most bases. For HVAC, UMCS, it's typically going to be DPW on an Army base, civil engineering on an Air Force base, and PWD on a NAVFAC base. If we don't get the CIA levels from our government clients, we're not going to stop the project. We're going to use presumptive levels based on that list that I just displayed. That's easily available at that website. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go into detail about control correlation identifiers, except to ditto what Tim said. They can be a challenge. There can be from a few hundred to a few thousand based on the impact level of your system. And next slide, please. I'll show you an example of what a CCI table looks like. These are all listed in Appendix H, I believe, of UFC 410.6. And so theoretically, every single control that you see here on this table needs to be matched to the control system that you're securing. So this requires you to know a lot about the control system and also about whether these controls are applicable or cannot be applied to that control system. And the higher the CIA impact level, the more controls you'll have. The good thing is that once you build a few of these tables, you can use them over and over again. You don't have to build a new table for every project that you do. Next slide, please. So there is contract language in the 250511 guide spec that we use, and also in the new RFPs that require individuals to be cyber certified. And what does that mean? There's a DoD instruction 8570 that explains that. We get this question a lot also from general contractors. They say, well, what does this even mean, and who do I go hire? And so next slide, please. If you look at DoD 8140/8570, which it is now, it lists the certifications that these cyber people need to have in order to do this work in construction. And also I've seen in RFPs coming from Air Force, they're asking for cyber certified as well. And so typically A&E firms, go ahead. Susan, just to let you know that these certifications are typically don't exist in Europe. They have to be obtained from the US. So. Okay, so that's a good point. What do you do when you, like we had a LASK project, I think in Poland or something. How do you provide that resource? Well, that's a large conflict because the only thing that is close to this is the IEC certification, 62443.
Oh,
It's
right,
an international.
6443, right.
Right, but that certification is international, but it's not on the list that we have here. That kind of reflects the difference in culture between Europe and the US. Most of what we see in the US is US centric, from the standards to the certifications. There's very little you can find in Europe that actually will bridge that gap.
That is a very good point. So I know I did a project a while back in the Middle East, and ISC2, right? The ISC2 org had the CISSP as an international certification, and there were several people in country with that. So maybe that's another one that could be used in addition to the IEC 62443 that they have. It's a good point, though. Thank you. Next slide, please.
Yeah, I had some input into that. This is Mike Catlett.
Oh, please.
Yeah, okay. I'm the G3 ISSM for headquarters user, and Army in Europe has a broad program called the AEITT Training Center that does cater to those certifications for 8570. They do offer the CISSP and all that. Any contractors we hire have to have those certifications prior to coming on board. But for government employees and DACs, military, they can attend the training offered through what's called the AEITT Center that we have established.
In Germany?
That's in Germany. That's Clay Concern Wiesbaden. I work for headquarters U.S. Army Europe.
Do they allow local nationals to attend? And is it offered in German?
They don't allow local nationals, or they used to allow contractors to attend, but at cost. But now they don't allow contractors to attend anymore either. Contractors have to have the certification prior to being hired onto the contract.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay.
That's interesting. And how do they fund that training? I guess it's funded by DOD or?
No, it's funded by headquarters U.S. Army Europe.
Oh, that's very good to know. Thank you for that. We do have a lot of European projects underway. I'll keep that in mind.
Okay.
So, thanks.
All right.
So the other challenge that we have is the general contractors do not understand the submittals that are required in the 250511. So it's a good idea to go to the whole building design guide yourself, download these submittals, and really understand what they're asking so that you can help explain to the general contractors via RFIs or things like that. And it's pretty simple stuff, you know, MAC addresses and other things. A riser diagram and things like that. Next slide, please. I wanted to talk a bit about STIGs because that's a requirement in 250511, but the catch here is that control systems, facility-related control systems, there are no STIGs for DDCs, for instance, or lighting control systems. So you're required to provide STIGs, but there are very few STIGs that can be applied, and there is no approved product list for control systems either. We have vendors call us every day saying, yeah, my, Johnson Control Medisys, they're not one of them, but that's the one that comes to my head. They'll say, yeah, our software is ATO approved. And so, you know, that's a real big misconception. There's no such thing because there's no such approved product list for control systems. We are told that it's all in the works, but we've been told that for a while now, and currently there is none. Excuse me. Next slide, please. So the exception you can find on the public website, the STIG checklist. Next slide, please. So this one, for instance, is a Windows server, right? So those are, of course, standard IT stuff. So if you've got a Windows server that your Johnson Control Medisys software is on, well, then you're able to provide a STIG or a technical implementation guide report for that server itself. Next slide, please. So the other challenge Tim also mentioned is staffing. There are a lot of staffing gaps across the entire industry, and that slows the authority to operate activity at a lot of installations. The Navy has issued this new spec 250811.20. You can find it on the whole building design guide. They have a unique approach to handling these staffing gaps, and that's issue a spec and have the industry respond to do this work for places that don't have ATOs. Next slide, please. And so this 250811.20 spec, it brings about a term called cybersecurity commissioning. It's a brand new term. You're not going to find cybersecurity commissioning in the public world at Google or Amazon or wherever. It's unique to DoD right now, and so it refers to the acceptance testing of the components and the RMF process for control system cybersecurity, and it's kind of analogous to the commissioning that we do for HVAC systems. And this 250811 specification has really changed the way we look at things from a contractor and A&E perspective. Next slide, please. Again, the .20 at the end is because it's Navy only right now, but it is a game changer. What it means for general contractors is that they now have to follow the control system cybersecurity process through the RMF cycle. And this means that they're going to be involved in this project a lot longer than they usually are, you know, after building occupancy, sometimes after warranty has expired on some of the HVAC components. It's a significant change. And so we're still working through, we've issued a few of these specifications already, and we're working through the costs and the other activity that it's going to require. Next slide, please. David Gary said that I can certainly throw him out here as a contact if you have any questions, if this NAVFAC guide spec comes your way. He's the primary author for this specification. Next slide, please. And so that's really all I had. I just wanted to give you 3 key takeaways. Cybersecurity is a team sport. It requires a lot of discussion and collaboration between the government and the A&E firms and the general contractors. You really have to work closely together, more than you do on most of the other disciplines at this point. It's not a fad that's going away. So that was a misconception. Also, you know, people say, oh, this UFC 410.6, it's just something that will go away in due time. It's just a reactive UFC, but it's definitely not. I can tell you, as a former Security Operations Center manager myself, we were definitely at war in cyberspace. You know, we don't have a body count yet, and hopefully we won't, but it's scary. The things that we see come across are automated tools on a daily basis. This is definitely not going away. And the third takeaway is we've got to ensure that there's funding in the DD 1391 early in the project. If you don't make sure your funding is there, you're going to have delays later on, and we try to avoid that as much as possible. And that's it for my presentation.
Susan and Tim, thank you so much. That was just an amazing amount of really solid information that you guys boiled down in a very coherent manner into just a very short time. So obviously you're pretty practiced at this, and we really appreciate you sharing it. So I'm sure we all have lots of questions. And what I'd like to do is we've taken the slides off the screen. And Susan and Tim, if you'd be so kind as to turn your cameras back on while we engage the audience. And as the audience is kind of give people time to kind of think about what questions they might have for you both, which I'm sure are a lot, I'd like to go ahead and ask the first one. So, Tim, you presented the basics of what the government's expecting specifically in Europe. And then Susan,
Yes.
of course, you covered just a great amount of the challenges, you know, at an overall level that everybody's facing and some solutions to those. But now I'd like to take it back to Tim and say, you know, so you've been there in Europe dealing with this Europe specific implementation of all this for a year now. So what could you just sort of characterize just at, you know, a basic level, what are you seeing? Like, how is it going? And in real life, you know.
In real life, in Europe, we're probably about 5 years behind the US. This reminds me of when I was working in the Air Force Civil Engineer Center when we first began this in 2012. It was the newness of the topic, the unfamiliarity with it, the internal the internal conflict of realizing they're asking engineers to do IT work. It's all of this all over again. But we know the way forward. And the way forward is being able to have a clear explanation of what it is that the US expects to have. So the German government understands that this is a requirement of the US that is not going away, and they are doing what they can to try and understand it. But the language has to be clear enough for them to say, this makes sense. They do this work already. They do this, but it's very much an IT function. There's even a German arm of the government. It goes by the acronym BSI. They've been doing this for control systems since 1990s, but it's not something that's understood from an engineering construction discipline. And that is the point that needs the most improvement. We think that by making the language clear, being able to clearly explain what our interest is, our needs are, we see that there's a way forward. But it's very much a one-on-one conversation with each state construction arm of the government. There are 17 states, I think, or 16 states if you're not counting Spain. They're in Germany. So it's one of those things where each one has its own. Each region has its own. We have to introduce this and work through this in each one.
Wow. Yes, I can imagine. So speaking of that, and I'll if anybody has questions that they want to ask, please just go ahead and raise your hand, and then I'll call on you. But I would also like to ask another question. So you've spoken specifically about Germany. So of course we know there's 30 plus states that the Europe district has in its AOR, plus potentially Africa. But maybe we'll set that one aside for a moment. What about some of the other states like Belgium? You know, we're building a lot there in Netherlands, Italy.
So yes, most of those contracts typically are direct projects. They don't have a government construction arm. So we tried to use a US standard spec, and there the challenge is translating the intent into the host language and conveying the thought to the AEs that are there. They seem to be, these other countries seem to be more acceptable to the idea, but it's the understanding that the execution was carried out properly and the follow through to say that it was done well. That is still an area of challenge for us in those countries. So the good news is that most of what we're building is in a military facility, so it's easy for us to come up with the requirements for them. But the execution, again, relies on the customer for RMF. We will provide the documentation as we see fit and as we see as possible. But from there, how much hardening that the system gets ultimately depends on the customer who receives it.
Great, thank you. Okay, I see in the audience there's a hand raised. Frank Verano. would you go ahead and ask your question?
Hey, good afternoon. Part of this is just I wanted to say a sincere thank you to Tim Nauman. I've had the enormous pleasure of working with him over the last year. I am one of those old school, dumb steel and concrete engineers that was the last one to walk into our field office when I PCS'd here and say, oh, great, you're the one who gets to do the RMF because you can spell RMF. So I wanted to thank Tim for all the support he's given us, us being DHA over the last year. One point also, just to point out, DHA, as you all know, is a new organization that's still assembling its requirements. So we are working internally to get to the point where we can look at Air Force, Navy, and Army requirements and see which ones we're going to apply. Also, we're working with getting a cyber FTE here eventually on contract. That and that's the question for Tim. When on your slide 5, when you say that the UFC 41006 assumes that the customer has staff assigned to support the topic, would you consider a contracted FTE through NIWC to be that support staff?
Yes, if they are designated in that role, and then yes, absolutely. Only certain designations require official letters of authorization. So that is AODR, SCA. Those are typically the ones that have a requirement for that. But if the organization says officially that this is our representative in this role for RMF, we're good to go.
Perfect. Okay, great. Again, thank you. And one question for Mr. Catlett. You had mentioned about training opportunities in Wiesbaden for cyber. May I email you offline to see what's available, if there's any remote training available, or is it all in person?
No, they're doing a lot of online training now, but you have to see how. I'll give you the points of contact for the Army and Europe Information Technology Center, and you can make contact with them and find out how they go about. They used to allow you to attend the training, and as long as you did a cost reimbursement back to USACE. So like, yeah, go ahead and send me an email, and I'll send you, and I'll point you in the right direction. Okay.
Greatly appreciate it, sir.
No problem.
Thank you.
And does anybody know, is USACE running some similar training? Doesn't sound like anybody knows. That might be a question we can I can research a little bit. Okay, another question that I have for you, Susan, since, oh, I'm sorry, before I ask another question, it looks like Doug Anderson, would you like to ask your question? And feel free to turn your camera on if you want to get more. We'll try to be a little bit more like we're in person.
Good morning, good afternoon. Really appreciate the presentations. There's just a high degree of expertise sitting on this call. Well worth getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to join. Did I understand that the expectation is that the services on the AE side that's supporting cybersecurity still have to fall in to the 6% limits on A&E services? It's not considered additional design services?
You want to answer your perspective, Tim?
No, Susan, I don't have a perspective on that.
Okay. So here's the deal. If you can add these as pre-design services, that's great. You can include them as consulting services. If you have to keep them within the 6% limitation, good luck, because our projects are already very budget constrained, especially the last year, right? So getting another 100 or 200 hours in for cybersecurity services is a big challenge for A&E firms. in squeezing that into the 6% rule. You know, we had to do that with LEED a while back and sustainability, and now we've added cybersecurity, and we hear this every day from project controls and estimators. You know, so we've got to make sure that we let our clients know when we're negotiating fees that cybersecurity has to be included as a discipline, and our clients don't want to do it either. To be perfectly honest, they don't have the budget either. So there are budget issues with this mandate, and it's better than it was a few years ago, but it is still a challenge. And yes, you have to have cyber within that 6% limitation, unless you can call it a pre-design service and label it security consulting. And we do that a lot when we do education and training for as part of our design fees. But you've got to have a client that is okay with you know, that being on his docket or his RFP.
Yeah, well, I would agree. It is a challenge to continue to put more and more services in the same sack of cost. And so I would think that would be something that SAME might take as a mission to try to help educate for the A&E part of the industry, because contractors, they don't have it either, and it becomes a challenge in design build. Right? They say, well, that's design services, you got to do it. Well, no, it's, you know, it's services outside the original scope. And so I think this is a topic that if we're going to continue to add, I mean, there's no question cybersecurity is going to become one of the lead disciplines of projects. You know, when you take it down to the level of communication between light switches and light fixtures, people just can't continue to do that for the same fee. So I appreciate your time, and I think it's a topic that's going to just continue to grow and grow.
Yeah, very good question. And just to add, these people aren't cheap, right? Right. You're paying premium dollar for these skill sets. So we do need to find some type of cost estimation solution.
Thanks. Again, thanks a lot for both of your expertise, and appreciate the opportunity to join the meeting today.
Thanks for your question, Doug. So also, you know, Susan, you laid out just, I mean, you pulled together everything in one spot, which is really, really helpful to everybody. And we're getting a lot of comments to that effect. But, you know, you offer great solutions to different challenges. But what I would, and this is, you pointed out that this is hard for everybody, especially because of the money. But what about these really small firms? Like, where would you recommend, where do they start? You know, where do you what's the most things they need to focus on first to just get a handle on this?
So the small design firms or the small?
Well, really both.
Okay, yeah, so for design firms, you should develop a partnership with a cybersecurity consulting firm that does this control system cybersecurity. On the whole building design guide, you can, under the cybersecurity section that I provided a link, you can find some other links that'll point you in that direction. I don't have a list of all the people doing this now. Do you, Tim, have a list of resources quickly available?
No, but there's one good document that everybody should be familiar with. That's probably the most helpful in the idea of what has to be done. And that is that NIST special publication 800-82. It's actually cybersecurity control system
industrial control system. Yeah.
Yes, but it actually has all of the pieces and parts that say if you want to secure these features, it tells you exactly what you do. And it's tailored for language for control systems. And the second thing I would do is that, remember, this is an IT problem that they're asking engineers to solve. That's not always a good solution. So the answer there is, I would find a good DDC controls engineer, an HVAC engineer essentially that works with DDC, because these concepts that we speak of, they use almost every day. They just don't apply it on the large scale like that's been asked of them. So if you have an HVAC guy that knows DDC and you can find the 882, which is online and you can Google it. It's on the whole building design guide. You'll have two of the biggest tools in your arsenal to start working towards this. The rest of it is negotiating a clear scope from the PM that you're working with on the project, making sure that they know what they're asking for.
Yeah, agree, 100%. I would not go call up an IT cybersecurity company, though. That's the wrong thing to do. Like Tim says, find a good HVAC DDC person, and they'll know exactly where to go.
Yeah, if you go to an IT professional for this, $250,000 per system will seem like small money.
Yeah, and they won't know what a DDC is, right?
No, that's true.
That sounds like great practical advice. I really appreciate that. So another thought I was wondering, Tim, is from the government perspective, or maybe just specifically for Europe District, you know, how are you ensuring that this is getting built into every scope?
Well, very good question. We understand from the request from our program managers and project managers that it's that the customers are becoming more interested in this, and the requirement is showing up more clearly in a scope of work. So the leadership at the Corps of Engineers here in the Europe District is proactive. They are trying to find a way to support the district in getting clarity from this mandatory center of expertise, providing language with the BAWAMs that are here to come up with useful descriptions of the work that needs to be done. And they have a plan to coordinate that with the BAWAMs once that's prepared. So it is all iterative. There's no silver bullet, and there's no like, we'll jump over the line and we're there. It's getting everyone familiar and making sure that the building blocks we're using are correct. And that's the piece we're working towards. Ultimately, there's the part of the equation we haven't jumped into yet is the construction inspection, because that is where the documentation is created that the UFC asks for. That is the documentation that the customer is given. So once the first wave is done, we expect that the construction site can now have something to use as a reference for what it is that they are expecting from the contractor on site. So that's the strategy that we're employing here at the Europe District.
Very good. Great. Does anybody else have any questions from the audience? Just go ahead and raise your hand. We'll call on you. You don't want to do all the talking. Let's see. And Tim, do you make yourself available? I think we were sharing your email, right? On the slide.
Yes, it's on the front page of the slide. Just send me an email. I'll be happy to answer whatever I can to see how we can help out to help others and become more familiar with this topic.
Great, thank you. And Susan, how are you spending most of your time? I know you're out, you know, trying to share this great information with a lot of different people, but where do you find that, you know, when you're not educating and you're really doing your job, where do you find you're having to spend most of your effort?
Yeah, that's a great question because it's shifting. So the past few years, since about 2018, we've been doing lots of design work, right? Just design. But now with this new, especially with this new Navy specification, we're moving into the field. So we started with one person, me, and I think I met with Tim at Energy Exchange a few years ago, right? And so there was me. Now we've got 12 people on staff. And the interesting thing is that they come from the engineering side, not the IT side. So they're engineers that have trained now and have got cybersecurity certifications. That's really the best way, I think, to staff your control system cyber, because it really is an engineering problem, not an IT problem. So it's easier to train engineers how to secure systems than to try to train IT folks how to do engineering. I'm not talking bad about IT folks. I'm just saying it's a better fit that way. But anyway, we spent most of our time in design, and now we're moving out into the field and doing a lot of work for some general contractors too, because there's just not enough people. So we're out there.
Very interesting.
Hopefully in Germany sometime. After COVID, post-COVID.
Yeah.
You guys are very lucky to have Tim out there in the European region. He's a rock star. Everybody knows him over here.
You're much too kind, Susan.
No, you are really very world-renowned, I think.
That's kind of you to say. Thank you.
And Susan, you bring up a point I think I asked you before we even started. How are the other districts? I mean, do they all have a Tim Nauman, or are they getting your expertise in some other way? How is that working?
Maybe Tim can answer that. I know that for myself, I work with Bob Zendler almost every day. Right, Bob Zendler, Elliot McConnell, Anderson, some guy named Anderson. I forgot his first name.
Austin, maybe. I don't know there, but Elliot and Bob are the two that I work with the most. Yeah. Yeah.
So they're out of Huntsville, though, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there is an electrical cyber person in USACE Omaha district, Marcy. And so I'm seeing now all the district, Louisville, they got a person. So it started with Bob Zendler in Huntsville, and now we're seeing all the Corps of Engineer regions populate with cyber folks. So it's great. Navy, same thing. We know all of our Navy cyber folks in every region. Air Force, I don't know what's going on there, Tim.
Well,
yeah, we don't have any people.
Well, now I can tell you this. When I left there just about a little more than a year ago, the Air Force had executed a contract to put in technical people who will function as information system security officers.
For General Dynamics, was it?
For GDIT, yeah. Right, a contract. So their focus, though, was on inventory and then the current risk posture of the systems they have. But those points of contact at all these military, on these Air Force bases, have reach back capability to the AFCEC operations directorate. And there, they can do design review. They are working on the CE coin, which is a segmented network off of the AFNet. So they have a more, they're trying to steer this into continuous monitoring. That's their function. They are looking at the operational side of this. The accreditation piece, the design of what goes into this, it's done through their facilities engineering section for MILCON. And they lean very heavily on the Corps, expecting that the Corps will deliver to them whatever it is that they may need. So there's room for improvement there, but there are people who are already assigned at Air Force bases within the civil engineer squadrons that should be able to answer the questions we have. You just have to ask for them.
Thanks.
Very good to know. Great. So Susan and Tim, you just have provided such a wonderful program for us today. One of our attendees noted it's the most practical, topical, and useful presentation he's seen. So, and I certainly would second that. This is you really did take a huge amount and boil it down to very digestible session, and we just really feel fortunate to have you join our post today. So thank you so much to your efforts, and I'll turn it back over to Charisse to wrap up.
I want to echo that and the comments that are in the chat. This has been a very practical, very informative presentation. We appreciate that a lot. Margaret, I see we have another hand up.
Okay, yeah, we got 1 more minute. Let me get to our part. Whoever's got their hand up. Looks like it's Michael Catlett. Please go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I just also wanted to say this is my first look at facility engineering itself, and it was very informative, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for your comment. Charisse?
All right, we appreciate all of you that joined. We hope you found this was informative. It was for me, for sure. Thank you, and we hope to see you again at our next event next month.
And thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
And please keep me on the roster. The email invites, okay?
Okay. Are you a member of SAME?
No, I'm not.
Wow.
Just tell me the program.
I'll reach out to you.
You got my email address. Okay?
You got it.
All All right, thanks.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Have a
again.
great day, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.